What you are about to hear will fundamentally change everything you thought you knew about pre-Columbian contact, ancient American history, Vikings, and human civilization. Using cutting-edge genetic analysis, archaeological evidence, botanical forensics, and mathematical probability, we can now prove beyond any doubt that the same elite networks documented in our previous episode operated on a truly global scale, millennia before Columbus ever set foot in the Americas. This isn't ancient aliens, this isn't lost Atlantis, this is something far more disturbing. The evidence is so overwhelming, so mathematically impossible to dismiss as coincidence, that it forces us to completely rewrite the story of human civilization. Welcome to the Ocean Crossers. This is the midpoint bridge between the Bronze Age world and the Iron Age, a switch in location and time periods that reveals the extension of the same elite networks into a new age and hemisphere. What you're about to witness represents the Khan system's maritime expansion across oceanic boundaries, carrying the bloodlines and institutional frameworks we documented from the Pontic Steppe to the shores of the Americas. This is the crucial link before we dive into the second half of our elite continuity matrix, from Greece through DARPA, tracing how these same networks evolved and adapted across 6,000 years of human civilization. The evidence assembled here doesn't just connect the ancient world to the modern, it proves some parts of the Americas were integrated into global elite operations millennia before Columbus, setting the stage for everything that followed. In 2025, comprehensive genetic studies confirmed something that shatters conventional historical narratives. Most Europeans had dark skin until approximately 3,000 years ago, not to fixate on skin tone, but we must reevaluate a concept we touched on before. The vast majority of Europeans were dark-skinned for 47,000 years out of Africa. They survived ice ages, built Stonehenge, developed complex societies, but they remained dark-skinned. Only 8% of Europeans then were as pale as they are today. Then, in just 2,000 years, pale skin exploded across European populations. We showed in the last episode that this wasn't gradual vitamin D adaptation. This was forced selection under elite male replacement during the exact period of steppe elite expansion. This genetic revolution transforms our understanding of the pale gods phenomenon. When physically distinctive individuals with lighter skin arrived bearing advanced metallurgical knowledge and superior military technology, they weren't misidentified as supernatural beings. They were biologically distinctive from the darker populations they encountered. Consider the pattern across supposedly isolated civilizations. Quetzalcoatl in Mesoamerica, portrayed as bearded and light-skinned. Viracocha in the Andes, described as a pale creator deity. Kontiki in Polynesia, remembered as a red-haired, light-skinned lawgiver arriving by sea. These weren't invented deities, they were biological memories of encounters with physically distinctive maritime elites. But the genetic evidence gets even more impossible to explain. In 2015, Harvard geneticist David Reich made a discovery that should have revolutionized our understanding of human migration. By analyzing DNA from indigenous populations across the Americas, they identified what they called Population Y, a genetic signature in Amazonian tribes that linked them not to Siberia or East Asia, but specifically to Australasian populations from Papua New Guinea and the Andaman Islands. The Surui and Caritiana tribes of the Amazon carry genetic markers that show closest affinity to populations 8,000 miles away across the Pacific Ocean. These markers appear nowhere in North American populations. As Reich himself acknowledged, we see in Amazonian DNA a ghost population related to modern Andaman Islanders. The geographic separation suggests ancient maritime contact. There is simply no plausible scenario in which this Australasian genetic signature could have entered the Amazon basin through North America without leaving traces. The only reasonable explanation is direct maritime contact across the Pacific Ocean, precisely the type of contact traditional scholarship insists was impossible 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. In June 2024, archaeologists announced a discovery that fundamentally transforms our understanding of ancient maritime capabilities. The energy company Energean discovered the oldest deep-sea shipwreck ever found, a Canaanite merchant vessel that sank 3,300 years ago. The shipwreck was found at a depth of almost 2 kilometers, 90 kilometers off the Israeli coast, in the middle of the open sea. Jacob Shavit, Director of Maritime Archaeology for the Israel Antiquities Authority, acknowledged, "The discovery of this boat now changes our entire understanding of ancient mariner navigational skills. It is the very first to be found at such a great distance with no line of sight to any landmass." The shipwreck's location indicates sophisticated celestial navigation capabilities, exactly the skills required for transoceanic voyages. Navigation was done using the heavenly bodies, calculating the angles of the sun and stars. This wasn't speculative wayfinding, but precise astronomical navigation. There are historical accounts suggesting that Phoenician sailors, possibly commissioned by Egyptian pharaoh Necho II, circumnavigated Africa in the 6th century BC. Herodotus and Hanno, the Phoenician navigator, described this, among others. Dating to 1400 to 1300 BCE, this shipwreck aligns perfectly with our timeline for Phoenician maritime expansion and the expulsion of the Semite Hyksos and Phoenicians' predecessors from Egypt, both still just Canaanites going back and forth between different territories. If they were routinely sailing far from shore in the Mediterranean, the extension to Atlantic and Pacific voyages becomes not just possible but probable. But the Canaanites weren't the only ancient civilization with advanced maritime capabilities. The Egyptians possessed even more impressive vessels. Khufu's solar boat, dating to 2500 BCE, measures 43.6 meters long, 24 meters larger than Columbus's Santa Maria, built 4,000 years later. This fully preserved vessel used mortise tenon joints with no nails, construction superior to European ships built millennia later. Experimental reconstructions confirm it was fully seaworthy for open ocean voyaging. The boat had a steering system, deck house, and rigging attachments capable of handling both Nile and Red Sea voyages. In 1970, Thor Heyerdahl's RA-2 expedition crossed 4,000 miles from Morocco to Barbados, using ancient Egyptian papyrus ship designs, proving that Old Kingdom maritime technology was sufficient to reach the Americas. The oceans were not barriers, they were vault corridors. In 2021, the experimental voyage Phoenicians before Columbus successfully crossed the Atlantic, using only Bronze Age tools and navigation techniques. The voyage demonstrated that Phoenician ships had the speed, durability, and star mapping capabilities to reach the Americas routinely. Chinese maritime capabilities were equally impressive. Han Dynasty ships from the 2nd century BCE were substantially larger than Columbus's vessels and featured watertight compartmentalization, a safety feature European shipbuilders wouldn't adopt until the 19th century. The sternpost rudder appeared on Chinese ships during the 1st century CE, but wouldn't reach European ships until the 12th century. Ocean current analysis demonstrates that the North Pacific Current creates a natural maritime highway from Japan to the North American coast. In the 1890s, lawyer James Wickersham documented that from the early 17th century to the mid-19th century, several dozen Japanese ships were carried from Asia to North America along the powerful Kuroshio currents. Japanese ships landed at places between the Aleutian Islands and Mexico, carrying a total of 293 people in 23 documented cases. In 1834, a dismasted Japanese ship was wrecked near Cape Flattery in the Pacific Northwest, with 3 survivors enslaved by Macquars before rescue by Hudson's Bay Company members. If this could happen accidentally with disabled ships in the historical period, deliberate voyages using Han Dynasty vessels following the same currents would have been routine for ancient maritime civilizations. In 2025, a groundbreaking study led by Professor Yusuke Kaifu from the University of Tokyo proved ancient trans-Pacific navigation was not only possible but routine. The research team successfully recreated a 30,000-year-old ocean crossing using only Stone Age tools and techniques. The team carved a dugout canoe using period-accurate methods and paddled 225 kilometers across the treacherous Kuroshio Current in 45 hours, guided only by celestial navigation. Computer simulations confirmed that Paleolithic peoples could cross one of the world's strongest ocean currents by launching from northern Taiwan and steering southeast. If Stone Age humans could deliberately cross the Kuroshio Current 30,000 years ago, Han Dynasty vessels with superior technology following the same route would have made routine trans-Pacific contact inevitable. Perhaps the most incontrovertible evidence for pre-Columbian contact comes from botanists rather than archaeologists. Certain domesticated plant species have distribution patterns that simply cannot be explained without human transport across oceans. The sweet potato presents the most compelling botanical evidence. This domesticated crop originated in South America, yet was widespread across Polynesia before European contact. Sweet potatoes cannot survive ocean crossings through natural means. They are propagated through cuttings that would perish in seawater. Genetic analysis published in Nature examined chloroplast DNA markers in 1,245 sweet potato samples from across the Pacific and provided conclusive evidence for human-mediated transport. The Polynesian name Kumara directly matches the Quechua Andean word kumar, linguistic evidence supporting the genetic findings. Cotton provides another botanical impossibility. The same domesticated cotton species, Gossypium barbadense, appears on both sides of the Pacific before Columbus. This 26-chromosome hybrid could only result from Old World and New World cotton breeding, a statistical impossibility of natural occurrence. But perhaps the most controversial botanical evidence comes from the analysis of Egyptian mummies. In 1992, German toxicologist Svetlana Balabanova published findings that sent shockwaves through the archaeological community. Chemical analysis of Egyptian mummies revealed traces of cocaine and nicotine, substances derived exclusively from American plants supposedly unknown in the Old World until after Columbus. Using sophisticated gas chromatography and mass spectrometry, the research confirmed the presence of these compounds in Egyptian mummy tissue. Despite repeated attempts to dismiss these findings as contamination, subsequent studies have confirmed the original results. Tobacco is exclusively American. There is no natural occurrence in the Old World before Columbus. The presence of American plant compounds in Egyptian mummies represents a direct challenge to the conventional isolation narrative. The bottle gourd provides another example. This domesticated plant appears in both pre-Columbian Americas and Africa and Asia, with DNA evidence confirming it didn't reach the Americas through natural dispersal but was transported by humans across the Pacific. The cumulative botanical evidence creates a pattern that cannot be dismissed as coincidence. These weren't wild plants that might have drifted on ocean currents, but domesticated crops requiring human cultivation and transport. Around 800 BCE, the Paracas culture arose along the coast of southern Peru. The Paracas necropolis contained two large clusters of crowded pit tombs, totaling about 420 bodies, with elaborate burial chambers that were reused over centuries. A practice where the heads of the deceased were taken out, apparently for rituals, and later reburied. But the Paracas weren't just remarkable for their sophisticated textiles and astronomical knowledge. Recent DNA analysis has revealed something that challenges conventional migration theories. DNA testing revealed unexpected European and Middle Eastern haplogroups. H2A, found most frequently in Eastern Europe, T2B, originating in Mesopotamia and Syria, and U2E from the Caucasus region. Multiple samples showed blonde to reddish hair that is 30% thinner than Native American hair. It is genetic. The vast majority of Paracas skulls were deliberately modified through cranial deformation, primarily into tabular erect or bilobate shapes, a practice signaling elite caste status seen from Sumer to the Caucasus. The burial practices reveal striking parallels to distant cultures. The Paracas created elaborate underground burial chambers with multiple interments, where bodies were wrapped in textile bundles and placed in seated positions facing north, accompanied by gold jewelry, weapons, and ceremonial objects. These burial customs bear remarkable similarities to the catacomb culture that succeeded the Yamnaya in the Pontic Steppe around 2800 to 2200 BCE. The catacomb culture augmented the shaft grave of the Yamnaya culture with a burial niche at its base, and featured burial chambers, metal types, and figurines very similar to those appearing in Italy and the Eastern Mediterranean. The best-preserved catacomb graves showed reed mat imprints on the clay walls and floor, suggesting the tomb imitated the interior of a yurt or wagon, with bodies carefully laid in the niche with numerous goods, bronze jewelry, foodstuffs, and tools. Genetic analysis of catacomb culture remains revealed R1by DNA haplogroup and haplogroups H and N in mitochondrial DNA, similar genetic signatures to those found in Paracas elite burials. The mathematical probability of the same burial chamber design, cranial modification practices, similar genetic markers, and ritual head removal appearing independently in Peru and the Pontic Steppe is vanishingly small. The timeline raises questions. 800 BCE places Paracas emergence during the height of Phoenician maritime expansion, exactly when Canaanite traders were operating as transporters for Persian, Greek, and steppe allies across the Mediterranean. Whether through maritime contact, post-Bronze Age collapse population movements, or independent development of similar elite practices, the Paracas represent something that conventional archaeology struggles to explain, a sophisticated culture bearing the genetic and cultural signatures of distant Eurasian populations, appearing on the coast of Peru exactly when global maritime networks were at their most extensive. The DNA indicates the Americas were not isolated from Old World developments. The question is not whether contact occurred, but how extensive these networks truly were. The Paracas weren't alone. In 2018, Harvard geneticist David Reich found that around 1100 AD, interbreeding occurred between Polynesians and native South Americans, centuries before Columbus. The coordinated global timing pattern, the timing reveals the coordinated nature of this global operation. While Paracas elite were establishing themselves on the Peruvian coast around 800 BCE, the same confederation was systematically destroying the Neo-Assyrian Empire through coordinated pincer movements we just documented. Maps show systematic encirclement, Cimmerian forces from the north and west, Scythian allies from the south, Median partners from the east. When the Hebrews called Cyrus the Persian Messiah, they were acknowledging he was part of their network. The mass marriages at Susa weren't diplomatic theater, they were formalizing centuries of elite intermarriage within the same confederation. The wars between these groups were dynastic succession disputes within the same network, not genuine conflicts between separate peoples. Meanwhile, the same elite markers, elongated skulls, steppe Balkan genetics and red-blonde Caucasian hair, were appearing simultaneously in Peru, exactly when global maritime networks reached their peak coordination. The synchronization becomes mathematically impossible to dismiss as coincidence. The Eurasian Y-DNA bottleneck spans 1000 BCE, exactly matching the South American replacement period of 4500 BCE. The same systematic elite male overwrite pattern operates on both sides of the Pacific simultaneously, proving coordination, the same confederation implementing identical population replacement strategies across oceans. But perhaps the most explosive evidence for this global coordination comes from what history records as a failed military campaign that was actually a massive seeding operation. When Darius assembled his forces to fight the Greeks, he didn't just use Persian troops, he pulled contingents from across his entire empire. Scythians from Central Asia and China, Indian cavalry units, Bactrian horsemen, and Eastern nomadic allies. This was the same confederation network we've been documenting, now mobilized under Persian imperial coordination. When those campaigns failed at Marathon and Salamis, Darius didn't ship all those eastern troops back home. They were left in the west and integrated into Mediterranean networks. Veterans with Asian genetics, Scythian military technology, and Eastern religious knowledge dispersed throughout the Atlantic world. This explains the impossible genetic signatures we documented earlier. The Caucasoid horsemen in Central Asian clothing appearing in Chinese Dian kingdom art, the red-haired mummies with Asian haplogroups in Paracas, Peru, the Eastern admixture in Viking-era genetics. They're all products of this Persian dispersal operation. The defeat of Darius was actually global confederation expansion. Eastern troops became mercenaries for Phoenician maritime networks, integrated into Celtic Atlantic routes, and established veteran settlements with their families across the Mediterranean and beyond. What looked like military failure was systematic seeding of confederation genetics and institutional knowledge from Asia to the Americas. Polynesian DNA was found in ancient Brazilian and Andean remains. The gene flow was bidirectional, indicating recurring intentional contact. This wasn't drift. It was network maintenance, a vault route connecting islands and empires. More shocking genetic discoveries came in 2025. A landmark genome-wide study led by Kim Louise Kretik revealed what the Bogotá Altiplano has been hiding for 6,000 years, a vanished people with no living descendants. Recent genetic findings confirm Polynesian ancestry in ancient Brazilian and Andean remains, revealing bidirectional contact across the Pacific. This was not myth. It was maintained connectivity, a seaborne network of exchange linking islands and continents long before European sails. In 2025, a groundbreaking genome-wide study led by Kim Louise Kretik uncovered a forgotten chapter in the Bogotá Altiplano. Ancient individuals dating back 6,000 years carried unique Q1b1a haplogroups, genetically isolated and distinct from any modern population. What followed was not gradual mixing, but a sweeping demographic shift. Between 6,000 and 2,000 years ago, new populations with Chibchan ancestry entered the region, bringing ceramics, agriculture, and new social hierarchies. The earlier population was replaced, their genetic signatures overwritten by a wave likely maritime in origin. No phenotype survival, no genetic drift, just overwrite. This echoes patterns seen in Eurasia, such as the Bell-Beaker transition in Britain, as in those cases the transformation was total, not just material or cultural, but biological. A new elite structure emerged with ancestry and cosmology aligned. Boats, not chariots, ritual law, not standing armies. This was a civilizational reformat, quiet, oceanic, and enduring. The Y-DNA bottleneck of Eurasia closely matches this time frame. From the first spread of the Proto-Indo-European languages to the end of the Bronze Age, 5000 to 1000 BC in Eurasia, and 4000 BC to 500 BC in South America. Olmecs are replaced just after the Bronze Age as well, with Mayans and Aztecs moving into their pyramids. In Guatemala's Mirador Basin, archaeologists have discovered what they call the first state-level society in the Western Hemisphere, 1,000 years before anyone suspected. El Mirador was the largest city in the Americas during its peak, with La Danta Pyramid Complex considered the largest structure in the ancient world by volume. El Mirador, the lost city of the Maya, where archaeologists have discovered the ancient Khan kingdom, though conventionally spelled Chan, it was pronounced Khan. This was the first state-level society in the Western Hemisphere, 1,000 years before anyone suspected. The Khan kingdom, the same title we documented in our previous episode, Canajor meaning serpent lord in Maya Palenque, Contiki in the Andes, the Phoenician Khnbal priest-lord compound, Khan among the steppe peoples, Cohen among the Hebrew priesthood. The Khan kingdom's capital, El Mirador, was the largest city in the Americas during its peak, with La Danta Pyramid Complex considered the largest structure in the ancient world by volume. The ceremonial center alone covered 9.6 square miles, supporting around 200,000 inhabitants, larger than any city north of Rome for the next 500 years. To put that in perspective, Paris was reportedly the largest city in Europe during the Middle Ages. Its population reached 200,000 in the 14th to 15th century and was higher than Constantinople. London reached an estimated population of 200,000 in 1600. Mayans also had water filtration systems using natural materials that Europeans would not develop for another 2,000 years. Recent LiDAR surveys revealed this Khan kingdom controlled 964 previously unknown settlements connected by 110 combined miles of elevated causeways, what researchers called the first freeway system in the world. These causeways required efforts involving massive labor coordination and sophisticated hierarchy, using the same engineering techniques as pyramid construction, creating 10 to 15-foot stone boxes, then filling, stacking, and leveling them off. While most of European Bronze Age cultures were building simple hill forts, the Khan kingdom was constructing raised white stone causeways extending to sites such as Nakbe, Wakna, and Tintal, connected by sophisticated water management systems spanning dozens of miles. The statistical likelihood of the same elite title, Khan, appearing as a royal designation in both the Maya Khan kingdom and across Polynesia, the Andes, and the steppe during roughly the same time period approaches zero. Around the same time this Khan kingdom was flourishing in Guatemala, similar patterns were happening in South America. In January 2024, LiDAR scans in Ecuador's Upano Valley revealed what researchers called garden cities, a vast network of over 6,000 rectangular earthen platforms connected by wide, straight superhighways spanning 300 square kilometers. This wasn't a scattered collection of villages. It was sophisticated urban planning rivaling the classic Maya, with roads that intersected at precise right angles, monumental platforms up to 70 feet tall, and agricultural terraces supporting 100,000 inhabitants, all dating to 500 BCE, making it the oldest and largest urban civilization yet discovered in the Amazon. As archaeologist Stephen Rostein admitted, "It's a complete revolution in our paradigm about the Amazon. The same paradigm that insisted the Americas were populated by savage hunter-gatherers until European contact. The mathematical odds become even starker when we realize these Ecuadorian superhighways were being built at the exact same time as terra preta soils were created by farming communities between 450 BCE and 950 CE in the Amazon, whose soil depths can reach 2 meters, 6.6 feet. It is reported to regenerate itself at the rate of 1 centimeter, 0.4 in per year. This discovery is devastating to mainstream academia because it predates other complex Amazonian societies by over 1,000 years. It demonstrates urban planning comparable to Old World civilizations. It was completely hidden until 2024, despite being massive in scale. It challenges every assumption about pre-Columbian South American primitiveness. Recent LiDAR surveys across the Amazon have revealed between 10,000 and 24,000 pre-Columbian earthworks throughout the Amazon basin. LiDAR scans reveal many lost cities, thousands of earthworks. The evidence for maritime elite networks becomes even more compelling when we examine the genetic connections between seemingly disparate civilizations. In 2016, scientists sequenced the genome of the Byrsa boy, a young Phoenician buried in Carthage. His Y-DNA was R1bm269, the same dominant haplogroup found among Basques, Celts, and Western Europeans. This shatters the myth of Phoenicians as a purely Levantine people. It confirms they were already genetically fused with Kurgan-descended populations, possibly through Mediterranean colonies or intermarriage with elites in Iberia and Gaul. Recent excavations in Gotland, Sweden, uncovered Viking-era women with deliberate cranial elongation, a practice known from Paracas, Peru, Sumer, and the R1b pharaohs of the 18th dynasty. The same 18th dynasty that was making alliances with Canaanites and had Mitanni princes and princesses throughout their courts. Canaanites are the first opium dealers in history, and the 18th dynasty brought opium to Egypt for the first time. Access to opium in Afghanistan and cocaine in South America mirrors the future Semitic kingpins of the opium trade, the Sassoons and the Rothschilds. Their opium wars in China are well documented. The Sassoons had an old Babylonian presence and eventually married into the Rothschild family during their bombing campaign to force the acceptance of opium sales. While rare in Norse contexts, these skulls reflect elite priestess cults, bloodline continuation via captured or invited seafaring women, and a Paracas-style backflow into northern Europe via pre-Viking or Phoenician genetic input. The genetic smoking gun comes from the systematic Viking marriage alliance system. Vikings systematically married elongated skull, red-haired Gotland queens from the Balkans for centuries, creating the perfect transoceanic travel and genetic seeding vector. Population signatures in South America show red-haired mummies in Paracas, Peru with identical phenotypes to Gotland queens. Elongated skulls match Steppe Caucasus patterns and Balkan cranial modification traditions. Rh-negative blood types in elite burials carry Gotland genetic markers. Eurasian mtDNA, including U2, E1, H1, and J1 in pre-Columbian context, shows maternal Baltic-Balkan lineages. These are the same genetic markers found in Cayenne, the Hyksos pharaoh, Paracas elite, and European R1b expansion, evidence of global Khan elite seeding operations through strategic marriage alliances. In 2022, CNN reported archaeological finds confirming that horned helmets were introduced to Iberia around 900 BC by Eastern Mediterranean traders, likely Phoenicians. The helmets mirror those worn by sea peoples in Egyptian reliefs, resemble ceremonial helmets later found in Celtic and Norse burials, and were not battle gear but status markers linked to ruling caste symbology. Horned helmets were theatrical vault regalia, not tools of war. The same maritime dye trading routes connected the Levant to Iberia to the British Isles. From Tyrian purple in Phoenicia to Celtic woad and Basque mineral dyes, a consistent trade network existed. These routes weren't simply economic, they were gene flow corridors with intermarriage between Phoenician elites and native clan rulers. The Celts, Vikings, and Phoenicians shared more than trade routes. They preserved the same ritual practices from their common Kurgan origins. Celtic and Scythian skull-cup drinking ceremonies, identical gold talks, and serpent iconography all trace back to the original steppe warrior priest traditions that first imposed the vault system across Eurasia. By the 9th to 11th centuries, Viking traders were selling Slavic and Baltic slaves in the Levant, often via Byzantine or Islamic middlemen. Some Norse sagas hint at Nordic mercenaries intermarrying with Semitic or Mediterranean noble lines. The Vikings used Eastern steel, woots and crucible steel from Central Asia and India, showing continuity of steppe technology. Berber pirates, often descended from Phoenician outposts and intermarriages, dominated Mediterranean slavery during the post-Roman collapse. This maritime slave economy, founded by Phoenicia, maintained by Vikings and Berbers, and later operated by Spanish colonizers, often of Basque Phoenician blood, was never disconnected. It was successive modules of the same vault system. The hidden name network. The elongated skulls of Paracas aren't biological anomalies. They're membership cards in an organization so vast that conventional history has desperately tried to keep its pieces separated. From the Black Sea to the Atlantic, from the Mediterranean to the Baltic, and demonstrably to the Pacific coast of South America, a single confederation of maritime priest kings operated under variations of the same divine name: Dan, Danu, Danaoi, Denyen, Danuna, Don, Danube, Indus Valley, Danu. This is clearly the signature of a global maritime priesthood, the Scythian source code. Before they were Greeks, before they were Celts, before they were Vikings, before they joined up with Canaanites and Hyksos, then Phoenicians, they were Scythians. The original steppe confederation from the Pontic Caspian region that would seed every major civilization with their elite bloodlines. The Scythians practiced cranial elongation. They drank from skull cups. They worshipped skyfathers and storm gods. They buried their elite in kurgans. They carried R1A and R1B genetics. They were the template. Georgia, which the Romans called Iberia or Iberia in antiquity, contains one of the world's largest collections of elongated skulls, the same Georgia that sits at the crossroads between the steppes and Anatolia. The same name, Iberia, Iberia, that the Romans gave to Spain, where R1B Basques maintain the highest concentration of this haplogroup in Europe, descendants of the Belgica waves that swept down from the Pyrenees. Two Iberias, both gateways, both marked by elongated skulls and R1B or R1A genetics, both critical nodes in the network, the Irish memory map. The Lebogabala Eren, Ireland's Book of Invasions, isn't just mythology, it's another version of cultural memory encoded, like we discussed in last episode. The text explicitly states that the ancestors of the Irish, the Milesians, traveled from Scythia, the Black Sea region, homeland of the original Confederation Egypt, where Hyksos, Denyen, and Canaanites show up for wars. Crete, the Minoan connection, the maritime technology center conquered by Greeks and Phoenicians, Greece, where they were known as Danaoi Iberia, where they established Tartessa, their final Atlantic base. A tale of three men who started a race, echoing the Table of Nations for European origins. Coincidentally, Europe has three male founder lines for most men alive today, all during the Y-DNA bottleneck. The Greek Revelation. Homer didn't call the Greeks Greeks, he called them Danaoi, 138 times in the Iliad. The heroes who sailed to Troy called themselves the sons of Dana. According to Greek mythology, Danaus arrived from Egypt with his 50 daughters, fleeing his brother Egyptus. He became king of Argos. His descendants, the Danaoi, became the lords of Bronze Age Greece. But archaeological evidence from Tel Dan proves this wasn't myth. The Haaretz investigation revealed Mycenaean pottery and Greek-style architecture, Aegean cultic objects completely foreign to Israelite religion, warrior burials with Greek weapons and armor, maritime imagery in a landlocked mountain city. The article asks, Were the Danites actually sons of Israel or Greek mercenaries hired by Egypt? The answer is both, because Israelite and Greek and Sea People were regional franchise names for the same international maritime network. The Egyptian connection. When archaeologists found Samson described in Judges, they found a Greek hero archetype, superhuman strength residing in his hair, telling riddles, consorting with Philistine women. The Bible itself admits the Danites abode in ships, the only Israelite tribe with a navy. The Denyen appear in Egyptian records as sea peoples, the same Egyptian records that describe horned helmets on these maritime raiders, helmets that would later appear in Bronze Age Denmark, 3,000 years before the Vikings supposedly invented them. At Medinet Habu, Rameses III had carved into stone the ships of the sea peoples, high prows, bird head ornaments, designs virtually identical to Viking longships that wouldn't appear for another 1,500 years, the Megiddo proof. In the Jezreel Valley, at Tel Megiddo, biblical Armageddon, archaeologists uncovered the tomb of a Canaanite nobleman from 1300 BCE, his DNA, R1BM269. This wasn't a merchant. This was a node operator buried in a cave 60 kilometers from Tel Dan at the exact moment the Sea Peoples were reorganizing the Mediterranean. The same marker as the Beersheboy from Carthage Basque, population Celtic aristocracy step markers like the red-haired Paracas elite.